The ice in Mark's whiskey had long since melted, diluting both the amber liquid and his resolve. He stared at his phone, thumb hovering over his daughter Lily's contact, wondering if a third unanswered text would make him seem desperate or just pathetic. If you've ever felt the crushing weight of parental failure, you'll understand why this moment matters. Stay with me through this journey. If it touches your heart, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more stories that illuminate the complicated beauty of human connections. Another? The bartender's voice pulled Mark from his thoughts. "I shouldn't," he replied, though he made no move to leave. It was his first night out in months. At 42, raising a 16-year-old daughter alone since his wife's death 4 years ago, nights out had become as rare as moments of genuine connection with Lily. Tonight was supposed to be different, dinner with his daughter at her favorite restaurant to celebrate her birthday. But an hour of waiting at their reserved table had yielded nothing but apologetic glances from the waitstaff and a text from Lily. "Can't make it, with friends, sorry." 3 simple statements that felt like 3 separate blows. The corner of the neighborhood bar had become his refuge of last resort, a place to nurse both his drink and wounded pride before facing the empty house that no longer felt like a home. "Mind if I sit?" Mark looked up to see an elderly woman, perhaps in her late 70s, gesturing to the empty stool beside him. Her silver hair was pulled into a neat bun, and despite the late hour, her eyes sparkled with an alertness that made him straighten his posture. "It's all yours," he said, sliding his melting drink aside. She settled herself with the deliberate movements of someone who had learned to navigate the world at a different pace. "Eleanor," Eleanor offered, extending a hand adorned with a simple gold wedding band that had clearly been worn for decades. "Mark," he replied, taking her hand briefly. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world, Mark," Eleanor observed, ordering a glass of red wine with the confidence of a regular. He laughed without humor. "Just the weight of parental failure. It's my daughter's 16th birthday, and she stood me up for her friends." Eleanor nodded, unsurprised. 16 is a difficult age. They're desperate to prove they don't need you, precisely when they need you most." Voice of experience? 3 children, 7 grandchildren, 2 great-grandchildren, she confirmed, "and I've made every mistake in the book." Mark found himself telling this stranger what he hadn't been able to articulate to his closest friends, how since losing his wife to cancer, he'd been trying to be both mother and father to Lily, and failing at both. How the bright, affectionate child had transformed into a sullen teenager who treated their home like a hotel. How he'd tried being strict, then permissive, then somewhere in between, with equally disappointing results. "She used to tell me everything," he said, the words catching in his throat. "Now I'm lucky if I get a full sentence." Eleanor sipped her wine thoughtfully. "Tell me about your wife." "Sarah," he said, the name still feeling sacred on his lips. "She was everything. Brilliant, funny, stubborn as hell. She was a botanist, could make anything grow. Our house was like a jungle when she was alive." "And now?" Mark stared into his watery whiskey. "I've killed most of her plants. Can't seem to keep anything alive these days." Eleanor leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that seemed to fill the space between them. "Make her pregnant." "Excuse me?" The old woman's eyes twinkled with mischief. "Your daughter. Make her pregnant." Before Mark could respond with the outrage building in his chest, Eleanor continued, "With responsibility, Mark. With purpose. With something that needs her as desperately as she needs to be needed." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small paper bag, sliding it across the bar to him. "Sarah's legacy. Don't let it die with her." Inside the bag was a small terracotta pot containing what looked like a dormant plant, just a stub of stem with no leaves or signs of life. "I don't understand," Mark said, confused by both the gift and the giver. "I was Sarah's first botany professor," Eleanor explained. "We kept in touch over the years. This is a cutting from a rare orchid species she helped preserve. It's been dormant, waiting, just like your relationship with your daughter." Stared at the pot, memories flooding back of Sarah hunched over her workbench, Lily at her side, both of them focused intently on some delicate plant operation. "Plants were their thing," he said quietly. "I never had the touch." "Neither of you do alone," Eleanor said, "but together, that's different. This orchid requires specific care, daily attention, precise conditions. It's temperamental, beautiful when it blooms, and worth every moment of frustration." "Like teenagers," Mark said with the first genuine smile of the evening. "Exactly like teenagers," Eleanor agreed. "Sarah sent me this cutting before she died. She asked me to keep it safe until the time was right to pass it on. I've been watching, waiting. Tonight felt right." "How did you know I'd be here?" Eleanor's smile deepened the lines around her eyes. "I didn't. Some connections transcend explanation, Mark. Sarah and I shared a love of bringing things to life. Perhaps she's still guiding us both." Mark carefully tucked the pot back into its bag. "I wouldn't know the first thing about caring for an orchid. That's the point. Neither will Lily. You'll have to learn together. Make it her project, her responsibility, but be her partner in it. This isn't just a plant. It's a piece of her mother, a living legacy that needs both of you." As Mark walked home that night, the small pot cradled carefully in his hands, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not the desperate kind that had sustained him through Sarah's illness, but something quieter and more substantial. The house was dark when he arrived, save for the blue glow of the television in the living room. Lily was curled on the couch, scrolling through her phone, her face illuminated by its harsh light. "Hey," he said, hovering in the doorway. She glanced up, then back at her phone. "Hey." In the past, he might have retreated, accepting this minimal acknowledgement as the best he could hope for. Tonight, he crossed the room and sat beside her. "I met someone who knew your mom tonight," he said, placing the paper bag on the coffee table. Lily's fingers stilled on her phone. Her mother's name was rarely mentioned between them, not because she was forgotten, but because the pain of remembering was still too sharp. "Who?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Her first botany professor, Eleanor. She gave me something for us." Lily set her phone down, curiosity overcoming her practiced indifference. "What is it?" Mark opened the bag and removed the small pot. "A cutting from one of your mom's orchids. Apparently it's rare and difficult." Lily reached for the pot, her fingers tracing the edge with a gentleness Mark hadn't seen in years. "It looks dead." "It's dormant," he corrected, remembering Eleanor's words. "Waiting." "For what?" "The right conditions to grow." He took a deep breath. "Eleanor said it needs specific care, daily attention. I thought maybe we could figure it out together." Lily looked at him, really looked at him for what felt like the first time in years. "I don't know anything about orchids." "Neither do I," admitted Mark. "But your mom did, and I bet we could learn." Something shifted in Lily's expression, a softening around the eyes that reminded him so much of Sarah that his chest ached. "Why would you want my help? I'd probably just kill it." The vulnerability in her question caught him off guard. "Because it matters," he said simply. "Because it was your mom's, and because I can't do it alone." Lily cradled the pot in her palms, studying the dormant stem as if it might reveal its secrets. "I missed your birthday dinner," she said quietly. "Yes. I'm sorry." "I know." They sat in silence for a moment, the unspoken weight of 4 years of grief and miscommunication hanging between them. "We could look up how to care for it," Lily finally suggested. "Mom must have had books about orchids." Mark nodded, remembering the shelves in Sarah's study that he'd been unable to bring himself to clear. She did, dozens of them. Maybe tomorrow we could... Lily hesitated, as if afraid of being rejected. Maybe we could look through them together? I'd like that, Mark said, careful not to reveal how much this simple suggestion meant to him. That night marked the beginning of what they would later call the Orchid Project. The next morning they ventured into Sarah's study, a room that had remained largely untouched since her death. Dust covered the bookshelves, the desk, the collection of empty pots waiting to be filled. Lily ran her fingers along the spines of botanical texts, pulling out those specifically about orchids. "Mom used to let me help her repot plants," she said, the memory seemingly surprising her. "I'd forgotten that." Mark watched as his daughter moved through the space, reconnecting with pieces of her mother and herself that had been buried under grief and adolescence. "She said you had a natural touch, better than mine." Lily smiled faintly. "You always overwatered." "Still do," I admitted. "That's why I need you on this project." They spent the day cleaning the study, transforming it from a shrine to the past into a workspace for the present. They found Sarah's notes on the specific orchid species, Dendrobium Sarah's Joy, named in her honor for her work in preserving it. The care instructions were exacting: specific light requirements, humidity levels, fertilization schedules. "This is going to be a lot of work," Lily said, scanning the pages of meticulous notes. "Too much?" Mark asked, prepared for her to back out. She considered the dormant plant, now sitting in a place of honor on her mother's desk. "No," she decided. "I want to try." The weeks that followed brought a new rhythm to their household. Each morning, Lily checked the orchid before school, misting it with the special solution they'd prepared according to Sarah's notes. Each evening, they documented any changes, adjusting its position for optimal light exposure. For the first month, nothing visible happened. The stem remained stubbornly dormant, giving no indication that their efforts were having any effect. Mark worried that Lily would lose interest, that this tenuous connection they were rebuilding would wither like so many of Sarah's other plants had under his care. But Lily surprised him. When friends invited her out, she made sure to be home in time for the orchid's evening care routine. She started bringing her homework into the study, working at her mother's desk while keeping a watchful eye on their project. "Do you think we're doing something wrong?" she asked one evening, 6 weeks into their efforts. "Mom's notes said we should see growth by now." Mark studied the plant, trying to channel Sarah's botanical intuition. "Your mom always said plants have their own timeline. We can provide the conditions, but they decide when to grow." Lily nodded, accepting this wisdom. "Like people." "Exactly like people," Mark agreed, recognizing the parallel to their own slow healing. The breakthrough came on a rainy Sunday morning. Mark was making coffee when Lily burst into the kitchen, still in her pajamas, eyes wide with excitement. "Dad, come quick!" He followed her to the study, where she pointed triumphantly at the orchid. There, emerging from the base of the stem, was a tiny green shoot, no bigger than a grain of rice, but undeniably alive. "It's growing," she whispered, as if speaking too loudly might scare the new life back into dormancy. Mark felt his throat tighten. "Your mom would be so proud." Lily looked up at him, her eyes shining. "Of the plant?" "Of you," he said, "of how you didn't give up." The tiny shoot became their shared obsession. They documented its growth with daily photographs, celebrated each new millimeter of progress. As the orchid slowly awakened, so did their home. Mark found himself clearing out other rooms, opening windows that had remained shut for too long, letting light back into spaces that had been preserved in grief. Lily began inviting friends over again, something she hadn't done since before Sarah's death. Mark would hear them in the study, Lily proudly explaining the Orchid Project, sharing her mother's botanical legacy. One evening, as they were adjusting the orchid's position, Lily asked, "Do you think Mom somehow knew we would need this? The orchid, I mean." Mark thought about Eleanor, about the strange synchronicity of their meeting. "I think your mom always knew what we needed, even when we didn't." "I miss her," Lily said simply. "Me too, every day." "But it's different now," she continued, carefully wiping dust from the orchid's emerging leaves. "Now, it still hurts, but there's something else, too." "What's that?" asked Mark. "Pride, I guess. That I'm her daughter, that I can do this, help something grow the way she did." 3 months after their project began, the orchid produced its first bud. By then, the study had been transformed into a thriving greenhouse, with cuttings and seedlings from Sarah's preserved collection gradually coming back to life under their joint care. The night the orchid finally bloomed, Mark found Lily sitting alone in the study, tears streaming down her face as she stared at the exquisite purple and white flower that had unfurled in the soft evening light. "It's beautiful," he said, sitting beside her. "It's exactly like in Mom's photographs, exactly the same." Mark put his arm around his daughter's shoulders, and for the first time in years she leaned into him rather than pulling away. "I'm sorry I've been so awful," she said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "You haven't been awful," he countered. "You've been grieving. We both have." "I thought if I didn't talk about her, if I pretended everything was fine, it would hurt less," Lily admitted. "But it just made me feel farther away from both of you." Mark nodded, understanding completely. "I did the same thing. I thought I had to be strong for you, which meant not showing how much I was hurting, but all it did was make us both feel alone." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the orchid bloom that had taken so much patience and joint effort to coax into existence. "Eleanor was right," Mark said finally. "About what?" "About making you pregnant with responsibility, with purpose." He smiled at Lily's confused expression. "It's what she told me that night at the bar, that you needed something that needed you as desperately as you needed to be needed." Lily laughed, the sound filling the room like music. "That's a weird way of putting it." "She's an unusual woman," Mark agreed, but she was right. As the weeks passed, the single bloom was joined by others, the orchid flourishing under their care. Word of their success spread through the botanical community that had once been Sarah's professional home. Researchers and conservationists began reaching out, interested in their work with the rare species. Lily, now 17, started spending weekends volunteering at the University Botanical Gardens where her mother had once worked. The director, who had been Sarah's colleague and friend, took Lily under her wing, mentoring her as Eleanor had once mentored Sarah. "She has her mother's touch," the director told Mark during a garden fundraiser, "and her determination. We're offering her an internship next summer." Mark watched his daughter across the room, confidently explaining the conservation project to a group of donors, her hands moving expressively as she spoke. "She's found her path," he said, pride evident in his voice. "Thanks to you," the director replied. "Sarah would be so pleased to see you two carrying on her work." On the anniversary of Sarah's death, instead of their usual separate retreats into private grief, Mark and Lily drove to the cemetery together, bringing with them a small pot containing an offspring of their original orchid. "Do you think she knows? About the orchid? About us?" Mark thought about Eleanor, about the mysterious ways connection persisted beyond understanding. "I believe she does. I think she's been guiding us all along." As they stood together, the spring sunshine warming their shoulders, Mark realized that Eleanor's strange advice in that bar had been exactly what they needed. The orchid had indeed made Lily pregnant with purpose, with connection, with a living link to her mother. And in nurturing that new life, they had found their way back to each other. The dormant plant had awakened, and so had they. That evening, as they tended to their growing collection of plants,